Ken Kraetzer for CaMMVetsMedia. We're going to do a special video today, talk about the commissioning of the new U.S. Navy littoral combat ship, the USS Cooperstown. It's going to be commissioned in New York City on May 6th, and it has the distinction of being named for the 70 veterans who are members of the Baseball Hall of Fame, of course, located in Cooperstown, New York. It's going to be a special day, and we've got some baseball experts and experts on veterans to talk with us. And just going around the circle, we'll start with Todd Anton, who is a school teacher in Victoriaville, California at the Heritage School, 32 years a teacher, but he has written a couple of books on baseball, who are veterans, lifelong Dodger fan. Todd, good to see you. Thanks for joining us early this morning.
It's never too early to talk about baseball. Come on.
Okay, great. And then from the Bob Feller Foundation, and also a member of the USS Cooperstown Commissioning Committee from the Navy League of New York, we've got Bob Arnold. Bob, good to see you.
Always a pleasure, Ken. Thanks for having me. Always happy to talk about the great work of the Bob Feller Active Valor Foundation. As you're aware, our mission is to recognize and honor our service members and those who support them, to provide support to military families and veteran causes, and to educate on the lessons of citizenship, sacrifice, and service to one's country, which we do by promoting the legacy of the 39 Hall of Famers who served during World War II, including our namesake, Bob Feller, who was the first American professional athlete to volunteer for World War II.
Very good. Glad you could join us. And you brought one of your colleagues and friends along, Bob DiBiaso from the Cleveland Guardians. He is the Senior Vice President of Public Affairs, 44 years in public relations supporting baseball. Bob, good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, pleasure to be on this. Not sure what I can add, but here to help wherever we can.
Absolutely. Appreciate your joining us today. And from Boston area, we have Bill Nowlin, who is an author and editor, and many roles in baseball, over 100 books that you have contributed, including one on when football went to war that I got the chance to also be a contributor to. Bill, good to see you. What's it like to know that the 70 members of the Baseball Hall of Fame who are veterans are going to be recognized with a new U.S. Navy ship?
That's excellent. I was very pleased to hear it, and very pleased to work with Todd on, I guess, 3 different books on veterans and war. One that Todd wrote himself and 2 that we collaborated on together. I feel like I should have my Red Sox cap on, but I didn't come prepared.
Okay. Well, let's start and go around the table a little bit. Todd, Anton, what are some of the great names in baseball who are veterans, who are in the Hall of Fame, that stand out to you? I know you were a personal friend of Jerry Coleman.
Yeah, well, to me, you can't get much better than Jerry Coleman. He, being out here, he's broadcaster with the Padres for a long time, and then he invited me to come to his induction at Cooperstown. And the story of Jerry Coleman is one of integrity, and he never really likes talking about it. He'll always talk about the Marine Corps. He'll always talk about his comrades, but he never talk about himself. And the true nature of a combat veteran is they don't talk about themselves. And my dad always said, my dad was a veteran of World War II, earned 4 Purple Hearts in combat in World War II and in Korea. And he says, those who did the most talk the least. And Jerry Coleman was a man of character and integrity. Did you want me to tell you what he did, or you want me to
tell us a little about it? I remember when
the gist of the story
for the Yankees.
Yeah, I mean, he was, he came up from Northern California. In fact, was a friend of Billy Martin, and when they were growing up and in that general area. But Jerry Coleman went into World War II, was a Dauntless dive bomber pilot flying off of Henderson Field at Guadalcanal, and his gunman was killed in combat. He flew numerous missions in World War II, relatively, I want to say 1943 to 45. But Jerry Coleman's major story that was in our books is what happened to him in Korea. And then Jerry Coleman flew F-4U-1 Corsairs in close ground support of troops. And at that time, the Corsair was a wonderful fighter pilot, but was being misused as kind of a thunderbolt of the Korean War. And it was really misused. It was weighed down too much. Effective, but it weighed down too much. Jerry Coleman was on one mission one day when he heard a distress SOS call coming from somebody, and that ended up being Ted Williams, that he heard over his intercom of Ted Williams going down. And that disturbed him greatly, but he was relieved to find out that, Ted made it. But on one of his missions, his wingman, last name of Harper, they were going over North Korea, and he saw his wingman get hit and destroyed. And he saw him go down. There was no reason to call out the helicopters. There was no reason to he was gone, and he knew that. And he went back when he landed in his base. Literally, somebody came out and said, "You have a phone call. Dan Devine wants to talk to you." And Jerry Coleman's like, "Jesus Christ, I'm in a war. Why do I want to talk to the Yankees? I don't want to. What are we talking about?" So he just saw his wingman die. He's being called by Dan Devine of the Yankees, and they said, "Hey, we know you get out really soon. Any chance you could talk to your CO and get back? We're in a hell of a pennant race with the Red Sox." Well, that's the last thing Jerry Coleman wanted to talk about, because there was real life and then there was baseball life, and neither of the two seemed to make any sense to him, and it actually disturbed him. And he said, "I got to go. And after action report, I got to let them know what happened. I'll get back to you. And he hung up on him. Well, one thing about the Yankees is they're persistent. And so Dan Devine picked up the phone and called Lim Shepard, who was a commandant of the Marine Corps, and said, "We need him." Lim Shepard was a big Yankee fan. And in about 48 hours later, he's on a plane flying back to Yankee Stadium. 48 hours after his wingman died, here he is on the field at Yankee Stadium for Jerry Coleman Day. And he's getting ready to leave he's getting ready to leave the hotel to go down. He gets a phone call from a woman he didn't really recognize. And she said, I need to talk to you. And of course, a woman calling you in a hotel, he's like, I'll come down and see you. And so he went down to see her, and there she was standing there with her kids. And it was Harper's wife. And she said, "Jerry, is he gone?" And he said, "Yeah." And he sat there for the next 2 hours telling her everything and talking to her and ministering to her and comforting her and talking to the kids. And finally, the taxi was honking the horn saying, "You got to get over there. They're doing a pregame ceremony." And he goes, "I don't care." But anyway, he talked to her. And then he got to the game, and he was suiting up, getting ready for the game. And Yogi comes to him and says, "Hey, there's some Marine at the door that wants to talk to you." And Jerry's like, "I got to get ready for this game. I haven't really even practiced." And he goes to the door, and they're standing there. Jerry's in his towel, naked, but has his towel around his waist, standing in the causeway there at Yankee Stadium. They're standing. There's a 4-star Marine Corps general, Lim Shepard, and Jerry Coleman, out of just reflex, snaps to attention, puts his hands up, towel goes down, and he's standing stark naked in the causeway at Yankee Stadium. That's Jerry Coleman. And so he looks at Yogi and he goes, "Submarine? Yeah, submarine. Yeah, you talking. That's a 4-star general, you idiot." And so he went out. They did the pregame ceremonies. They recognized his family and they recognized his service. There was a flyover. He got all the gifts. I think the Yankees even had a car for him to give, and he was there with his family. But the last thing Jerry did that day is he got a few hits. Bill's the expert on the stats, but he participated, and he said that was the hardest day of his life. So that's my Jerry Coleman story.
Okay. Well,
So
it's such a heartfelt story. As I said, I remember Jerry Coleman as well as a broadcaster for the Yankees. And let's hear a little bit. Bob Arnold, and we've got Bob DiBiaso, who's with Cleveland Guardians. A little bit about Bob Feller, and I know you with the Bob Feller Foundation. Tell us a little bit about Bob Feller's story, if you would.
Well, so it's funny, just to comment on Todd's comments about Jerry Coleman. So as I stated earlier, right, one of our mission points is to recognize and honor our service members and those who support them. So our namesake Bob Feller, right, first American professional athlete to volunteer for World War II, And our awards initially started as a Major League Baseball player, a Hall of Famer, and then the Navy worldwide vets Chief Petty Officer. And those three stages, right, represented Bob Feller's adult life. So at the request of the Secretary of the Navy, as you know, right, the Department of the Navy includes the Marine Corps. So he wanted an award named after a staff non-commissioned officer of the Marines. And that award is actually named after Jerry Coleman. So, you know, that tells you what he was all about. I mean, Jerry himself, he played baseball up until he turned 18 or even 17, and then he immediately joined the Marine Corps. He is the only one in Major League Baseball, I believe, that at least that's represented in the Hall of Fame as a broadcaster, not necessarily a player, but who saw combat in both World War II and Korea, flew I think 110 missions, and I think at one point I think one of his wingmen was actually John Glenn as well. I get confused. I'm not sure if it's either him or Ted Williams. Maybe Todd would know.
Ted Williams.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, Bob Feller, I never personally met him. He's definitely an American hero. Like I said, first professional player to enlist in the service, was literally driving from the farm in Iowa to meet representatives from the Indians, for which he played his entire 18-year career, 4 of which were interrupted by World War II. Was going to negotiate his contract for the 42 season, of which, you know, he would have been the highest paid player in baseball at that time, and heard on the radio that we had been bombed at Pearl Harbor, and upon arriving in Chicago, basically told the Indians to, you know, that he was not playing baseball, that he was going to serve in the military. 2 days later, he was enlisted into the Navy. You know, got from what I understand, was given a kind of a cushy PR job playing baseball, and said, well, listen, if I wanted to play baseball, I'd be playing for the Indians on a deferment. Send me to war. So they said, okay, Bob. He's like, great, put me on the USS Iowa. Sorry, boat's full. We're going to put you on the Alabama. Saw action in the Northern Atlantic, the Pacific. Was a gun captain, literally shooting down kamikazes in the Pacific. And then, you know, you Todd, again, you talked about Jerry Coleman and the way he was honored. Well, when the war ended, Bob Feller was, you know, discharged from the Navy, and 2 days later he was on the mound and pitched a 4-2 victory for the Indians. So you know, but Bob, like I said, Bob DiBiaso was very, very dear friends with Bob Feller. Certainly he can speak more to Bob and his legacy than I can.
Yeah, Bob DiBiaso, please speak up. Tell us about Bob Feller and any other Indians who were veterans that come to mind.
Yeah, not much to add, honestly, than what Mr. Arnold shared. The story of Bob, you know, driving from Van Meter to Chicago to sign probably the wealthiest contract in professional sports at that time. And he detours to the U.S. Navy Enlistment Center. You know, he prided himself on being a patriot, serving his country more than being a Hall of Famer. The website for the Bob Feller Act of Valor Foundation is actofvaloraward.org. actofvaloraward.org if you want to check on the foundation. You know, he always talked about that his greatest win was in World War II, not on the baseball diamond. And so he held his service to our country near and dear to his heart. One quick story, that Admiral Nimitz came aboard the USS Alabama because to boost morale, there was a U.S. Navy versus Army baseball game to be played on one of the islands, and Admiral Nimitz came to the USS Alabama and asked Bob Feller to pitch because he wanted to win that game so badly. And Bob Feller again said, look, I'm here to be a sailor, to be a part of combat. I'm not a baseball player right now, but my teammate, Bob Lemon, is actually on that island, and they aren't going to beat, the Army's not going to beat Bob Lemon. So let Bob Lemon pitch that game. And as story goes, Bob Lemon did in fact win that game. Another World War II Hall of Famer for our franchise. So again, not but much to add. You know, the story of Bob is we hope is pretty well known. And the founder of our foundation, in case you're not sure of this quick story of a gentleman by the name of Peter Fertig, decided to write a children's book that dealt with the next day after Casey at the Bat. Casey at the Bat ends, obviously, with there's no joy in Mudville, and the illustration of a baseball player with drooped shoulders walking away after striking out. But in baseball, the sun shines the next day and you get to play. So Peter decided to write a book about that, hey, we get to play the next day. And he didn't know Bob Feller and asked him to write the foreword to the book. And Bob thought it was a cool idea, wrote the foreword. Again, the two men never had met. And upon Bob's passing, Peter Fertig felt that he needed to do something in Bob's honor. So thus he worked to create the Bob Feller Act of Valor Foundation.
Wow. Well, Bob DiBiaso, we certainly appreciate you joining us. I know you have travel coming up today, but we appreciate your joining us. And as we said at the Cleveland Guardians game, May 3rd against the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium, the Yankees are planning a tribute to the USS Cooperstown and the 70 veterans who are members of the Hall of Fame that it represents. So certainly appreciate you joining us today. Hey, that's great. Bob, thank you for joining us today. And
thank you, guys. Sorry I have to run.
All right. Thanks,
okay.
Bobby.
Very good. Let's go
Bye-bye.
to thank you, and let's go to Bill Nowlin in the Boston area, author and editor of 100 books, many on baseball. Bill, what are your thoughts? Obviously, the Red Sox, Ted Williams, and other members of the Hall of Fame who are veterans.
Yeah, Ted Williams has always been my specialty because he was my hero growing up. I was actually born during World War II, but just barely, February 45. My father had been a veteran as well. He ended up, my mother always said, don't ever ask your father what happened during the war. And I knew something happened in North Africa, but I wasn't really sure what it was. I knew he was in intelligence work. In my mind, he was sneaking up behind Nazis and strangling them with piano wire. That wasn't really what happened. He was in a cryptography unit. He was off for a week of R&R at Cairo, and on leaving the airport, the plane crashed and killed every single person on the plane except my father.
Oh, wow.
He woke up 2 months later in Casablanca at the Fifth Army Hospital. He never showed any physical deficit. They did a very good job fixing both of his arms, both of his legs, which were shattered. I finally did ask him when we were both much older, but he was there. He served and but got out because this was early on in time for me to be born in early 45, 2 months before Hitler was taken off the face of the earth. Ted Williams was hit 406 in 1941. And famously, nobody has ever hit over 400 in the major leagues since that time. This is September 28th, was the final day of the 1941 season. December 7th, 1941 was a couple months later, Pearl Harbor. He was the sole support of his mother in San Diego, and so he did not rush to enlist like Bob Feller, but he did get in the 1942 season. But he signed up for the Navy about May, I think it was, in that year. He met somebody from Naval Air Base in the Boston area and was convinced to become a Navy aviator. Both him and Johnny Pesky, his teammate, signed up and went through training together. They went separate routes because they had different talents, but Ted ended up learning how to fly after the 42 season where he won the MVP. He was a pretty decent season. But he gave up a lot. He lost 3 years from his baseball career during World War II, and then 2 more years during the Korean War when he was with the Marine Corps as an aviator. It's quite a story. I mean, had a long career, but losing 5 years. One has done projections of how many home runs he would have hit, as opposed to the 521 that he did hit, and it's well over 600, adding in 5 more years of prime baseball talent. But he served. He went to Chapel Hill, trained with the Navy pilots there, and was so good at gunnery that he was made a gunnery instructor and sent to Pensacola to teach other pilots how to fire guns out of airplanes. Near the very end of the war, he was sent to Hawaii, and he served there. And who knows what would have happened if the war had not been brought to an end in August. But he completed his service time and then came back and resumed his Hall of Fame career in 1946, again dominating the league and taking the Red Sox to Game 7 of the World Series that year. Then he never saw combat, though. And, of course, he always wondered what it would have been like. He was called back to the Marines in 1952. I say the Marines because they were, in fact, part of the Navy, but the Marines had demobilized extensively after World War II, and they had a real need for pilots. And so they were scrounging around. Here they're calling a guy that was in his 30s, mid-30s, to come back to service because they simply didn't have enough pilots. And he was deemed not only qualified, but good and brought back. He wasn't that happy about it, but he did report back, and he served with distinction. I believe he was offered the opportunity to do PR speaking on behalf of the Marine Corps, to go around, recruiting, talking up the Marines and stuff. But he basically said, no, I never saw combat in World War II. And if you want me back, put me in a combat unit. He was, as Bob Arnold mentioned, assigned to the same unit as John Glenn, who became somewhat more famous later on. And the two of them flew 10 missions together. Ted flew 39 combat missions in all, 10 of them with John Glenn, the others with other pilots. On his very second mission, his plane was shot down. He couldn't even get back to the base, the Marine Corps base that he was at, so he landed at an U.S. Air Force base and crash landed his plane, jumping out of it and running before it exploded in flame. One can find photographs of that plane charred, just sitting on the tarmac at the Air Force base where he landed. Noon the next day, he was up on another flight, which is a good idea, not to sit around thinking about it for a couple of weeks and so forth. But he did end up flying 39 combat missions, shot at again. His plane was hit one other time, had no need to crash land that time, but he clearly saw, like Bob Feller, combat during wartime. It was just in a somewhat later war. That always impressed me as a kid growing up, to know that story, and then some of the other stories of his, not just baseball career, but he was the spokesperson for the Jimmy Fund, which fought to fight cancer in children. It was a fundraising tool that developed chemotherapy. We think of chemotherapy as a normal phenomenon now, but it was Dr. Sidney Farber at Boston Children's Hospital who became a good friend of Ted Williams, and he's the one that invented chemotherapy.
Wow. Well, Bill, thank you for that story. We're going to go around and talk about a number of other veterans, and I know Todd Anton can give us a great description of some of the Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers who are veterans, and obviously the list starts. We think of Jackie Robinson.
Well, yeah, it's a good place to start with Jackie Robinson. I mean, we just had Jackie Robinson Day all over Major League Baseball. The thing about Jackie Robinson that people don't understand, obviously they know that he was in the Army, and he was initially, I mean, he's going to be assigned to the 761st Tank Battalion that went overseas and fought. There's a great book by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar about that unit. And Jackie was looking forward to going into that. But the one story I don't think a lot of people know, and that I wish I could explain to like the Dodgers on Jackie Robinson Day, is that Jackie Robinson was being denied entrance into Officers Candidate School. He wasn't able to get in. They were discriminating against that, and he was fighting to get in. Well, it just so happens, Jackie Robinson was a legendary athlete at UCLA,
Sure.
a four-sport athlete, and that Jackie Robinson went over and was talking to his good friend Joe Louis. Joe Louis said, "This is not right." Joe Louis had obviously beaten Max Schmeling and made a PR for the country, and everybody loved him. And he went and raised heck, and he got into Officer Candidate School, and Jackie Robinson became what he became. So that's one story about Jackie Robinson I think is important for people to know. But my favorite story, I mean, if you go down the list of retired numbers with the Dodgers and Pee Wee Reese and Duke Snider, and you go down the list, they were all in the service. That is definitely true. But many of the athletes we're talking about were in the service, but those in combat is different. And I want to point out my favorite Dodger, besides Oral Hershiser, Mickey Hatcher, and all those guys for '88, but Gil Hodges. You can't go wrong with Gil Hodges. And Gil Hodges fought in Okinawa. He was there in intelligence. He earned the Bronze Star for his actions at Okinawa. But it wasn't necessarily that story about serving in combat. It's what he did afterwards, what combat does afterwards to these men. So in Ebbets Field, and I got this story from Vin Scully when we were writing the book No Greater Love, and Vin Scully, I went and interviewed him at Dodger Stadium. I sat down. I was sitting there with Vin Scully and Don Newcomb. You talk about Nirvana. That was great. And Vin Scully was telling me, "Todd, I wasn't with the Dodgers at the time, but Red Barber and Connie Desmond were at Ebbets Field, and it was a doubleheader. And at that time, on the 4th of July, kids had fireworks. You remember the string fireworks and everything. And so they were taking infield and everything. And shagging balls in the outfield was third baseman Billy Cox, and number 3. And some kids threw fireworks onto the field. And Red Barber described it to Vin Scully as, "I saw Billy Cox start running from the center field in a zigzag pattern, as you would to avoid being strafed by a plane or whatever it may be. He dove into the dugout, curled up in a fetal position under the bench in the Brooklyn dugout." And nobody really noticed that so much. I mean, it's warm up, everybody's busy. But Gil Hodges noticed that. And Gil Hodges went over there and sat with him, had his arms around him, and comforted him to bring him back from where he was in his mind. And I believe the manager at that time saw that, came out and talked, and was going to take Billy out of the next game because he thought he wasn't emotionally ready for it. And Gil Hodges went into the manager and said, "If you don't play him, you're going to kill him. This will kill him." And sure enough, Billy Cox was in the second game, played, and did just fine. And those are those stories about Gil Hodges that just are that you don't know, but it's the measure of the man, the character of the man, what he did and how he carried himself. He was who he said he was, and he was I just thought that was one of those stories. It's not about glory and battlefield or anything like that. It was about his humanity, and Gil Hodges to me is a superhero. And Vin Scully, I mean, he was in the Navy briefly in 1945. And all of that. So I have plenty more. The one story though I want to mention is Roy Gleason, who fought in Vietnam, and in 1963, and he was on the world champion Dodgers in '63, fighting, and he got his World Series ring. He played like maybe he got called up for the Dodgers at the end of the season, made a big splash. They carried him on to the final, the series. Fought in the war and everything. He got his World Series ring, and then fighting in combat in Vietnam, he lost his World Series ring in the mud, and never, he lost it. He came back. He was wounded. He came back, tried to pick up his career with the Dodgers. He was big. He was Frank Howard big. He was, and he never quite got his career back. And quite a few years ago, 7, 8 years ago, the Dodgers, realized that he didn't have his ring, and one night they invited him to come back for the first time since 1963 to the stadium, even though he lived in LA. And the Dodgers presented him with his World Series ring.
Wow,
And
what
there
a
was
nice
a moment. It was a moment. I tell you, I was there at the stadium that night, and I was crying. Everybody, if you know anything about the military and the service and what they all go through, I'm a child of a combat veteran. That brought him some healing and everything. And he was telling Vince Scully that his war ended that night. And so there's plenty more Dodger stories, plenty more Giant stories too. I mean, I don't know if people know that Monty Irvin was supposed to be the first African American in baseball, but because he was in the Red Ball Express serving in Europe, and Jackie Robinson had been discharged from the Army, Jackie got a head start on that, and that's how that ended up happening. But I have to give a shout out to Monty Irvin, who's another great man, and you can find that out. Bill and I did a video. We did a TV show called From the Ballpark to the Battlefield. Bob Feller's on that. Jerry Coleman's on that. Johnny Pesky's on that. It's great stuff. If you look at it, it's Fox News War Stories with Oliver North, From the Ballpark to the Battlefield. And you hear all these stories on there. Much better.
We'll have to see if we can get if that's online, and we can we'll put that as an attachment.
Yep, you got it.
To this. Todd, thanks. Bob Arnold, is there another story that comes to mind for you?
Well, you mentioned the heroes and the guys that, really went to war. I mean, you have Warren Spahn, who earned a Bronze Star at the Battle of the Bulge, right? A critical battle in World War II. Hoyt Wilhelm rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant, earned a Purple Heart, and there's numerous others. There's one funny story that I've heard throughout the years in my association with the Feller Foundation. So apparently, right, so Yogi Berra, right, who's also one of the Hall of Famers that was in World War II.
Served at D-Day.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. So I guess Bob Feller was always a little, frosty or crusty towards Yogi, and Yogi finally, kind of spoke up one day. He's like, Bob, what's your beef? And he's like, I find it hard to respect a man that didn't serve. And he's like, Bob, I was a 17-year-old kid on a rocket boat off of Omaha Beach on D-Day. He's like, oh, I wasn't aware of that. And then they were like best of friends from there on.
That's something. I think of that era. I think of when I was growing up, some of the Yankees. I remember Ralph Houck was their manager, player, and then a manager, and their president of the team in the early '70s, Michael Burke, when CBS owned the Yankees, he was an OSS officer, and of course. One day, Phil Rizzuto, another Navy veteran, the Yankees, a Hall of Famer, signed it. My dad and I were walking around the second deck of Yankee Stadium, right behind where the press box was, and we saw Phil Rizzuto, and I went over to see if I could get an interview. Now I'd ask for interviews. Then I was just asking for an autograph, and Phil Rizzuto was so nice to do that, and more than anything, he delighted my father, who was a U.S. World War II Army veteran, served in Italy. And my father was just delighted that Phil Rizzuto, who we knew was a Navy veteran, took time to do an autograph that day. But certainly within the Yankees, I remember the day Yogi Berra passed, and a Navy color guard was at Yankee Stadium for the national anthem. And what a great veteran he was. Also, I think Whitey Ford was the veteran, and let's go to Bill Nowlin. Is there another player or two from the Hall of Fame who was a veteran you'd like to highlight?
I don't really have anything more to add in that regard. Bobby Dorr was in the Hall of Fame, and he did serve in the Navy. He first worked in defense work in a factory in California, but then ended up joining, I guess it was actually the Army, and he was one of those that would have been on his way to the Pacific Theater, but the war did end in time, so that he need not go. So interesting that also Jean Yockey, the wife of Tom Yockey, the owner of the Red Sox, she spent a considerable period of time volunteering to work with some of the nurses. It was probably mostly PR work, but she certainly lent her time and was there to encourage some of the waves and the wax and the other nurses that were there ready to and serving.
Okay. And let's go to Todd Anton. Are there another couple of veterans that may come to mind who are members
Absolutely.
of the Hall of Fame? Go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked me that, because we were talking, we touched based on Cleveland Indians and Bob Feller, but we have to mention Lou Brissy. We can't talk about this baseball and war without talking about Lou Brissy, who, minor leagues, and then he went overseas in Italy and he gets his leg shattered, nearly amputated. And he comes back and he makes it to Major League. Now, Connie Mack was the one that really administered to him and brought him back and said, none of my players in the Philadelphia A's are going to be without. I'm going to take care of you. But he came back. Lou Brissy came back and partnered with Bob Feller on that tremendous pitching staff. But you talk about a man of God, a man of character, a man of faith, a determination to overcome. But I have to mention Lou Brissy. I just think that's important. And then lastly, I think we got to mention Billy Southworth, the manager in the Hall of Fame, whose son left AAA baseball to sign up on December 8th, 1941, to go into the service, and he became a B-17 pilot, flew successful missions all over Germany, and they took enough shrapnel and everything, but nobody died. His dad, who won the World Series in 1943 with the Cardinals, sent him his St. Louis cap that he wore as a lucky cap for all his missions. He modified that cap so it could fit all the headset. But anyway, Billy was successful. His names of his plane, I love his first name. The name of his first plane for Billy Southworth, who was a utility player everywhere, really. But the first name of his plane was Bad Check. And they're like, why did you name your plane Bad Check? And because bad checks are always returned. And so I love the name of that plane was Bad Check. And then the other name that was more appropriate is called the Winning Run. And the nose art on his B-17 was a St. Louis Cardinal with a bat that was on the nose. And that was his last plane that he had in Europe. And then he came back here to the States to train flying the B-29 Super Fortresses, which were problematic. They had bad carburetors. They were trying to fix the Bendix carburetors on those, so they performed well. So you can help me out here with your logistics in New York, but there's our United States Army Air Corps base right outside of where Shea Stadium, Citi Field is right now. And they were taking off and they were flying down to Florida, and the engines gave out. And so rather than over the city, he had to physically hold on to the controls by his hand because all the hydraulics were gone. And he got it over to Flushing Bay, where he crashed, and everybody was killed. He was killed, and he wasn't able to get out of the plane. Their currents, he was strapped in there. They weren't able to really locate it because the currents were so bad at the time. So they notified Billy Southworth Sr., his dad, in a game at Pittsburgh, that his son was missing and presumed dead, but they did not know for sure. And they went there, and he immediately went to New York and got on the search and rescue crew. Here's his dad on his little boat with a Navy search and rescue team trying to find his son. The imagery of this boat just going up and down while he's sitting there looking for his son. They weren't able to find him. And then a few weeks, months later, not that much longer later, their report came in of a body in a flight suit that washed up right off of where the Mets play now. And he went and identified his son, and they buried him. And as far as I know, Billy Southworth Sr. is the only Gold Star manager in the Hall of Fame. I could be wrong on that, but his story is so compelling. He never got over it. How could you get over that? And I think Billy Southworth Sr. and Jr. are worthy of being remembered. So
absolutely,
that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I appreciate Todd Anton from California, Bob Arnold from Long Island, Bill Nowlin from the Boston area joining us. How about we'll have each of you offer a final thought on May 6th, the USS Cooperstown will be commissioned in New York Harbor, named for the 70 plus veterans who are members of the Hall of Fame. Bill, final thought for us today?
That's wonderful to hear. And when I first heard about it a few weeks ago, I was very pleased to hear that. I hope it resonates widely.
Very good, Bill. Thanks for joining us today. And Bob Arnold from the Navy League in New York, and also a member of the Bob Feller Foundation. Final thought on the commissioning of USS Cooperstown on May 6th.
All right. Yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I was there in Hall of Fame weekend when SecNav Mavis named the ship at the in Cooperstown. And, you know, from the very get-go, and I believe the ship's motto is America's away team. And it was the military, and especially during World War II, that brought baseball to the rest of the world, really, you know, especially in the Pacific theater and even to Europe to a certain extent, where obviously it's caught on more in the Pacific theater. But I think it's great to have these guys recognized for their service to our country, and especially, you know, it's, you know, we all love sports to a certain degree, but, you know, those that are in combat in a way, you know, and I've talked to guys that have served all over the world, and some of their favorite times was in the middle of the Indian Ocean, being able to watch a White Sox game or a major league game, and it brought home back to them. So I think it's fantastic to have these guys recognized.
Bob Arnold, thank you so much for joining us today. And Todd Anton, calling in from Victoryville, California, a teacher for 32 years and at Heritage School in California, and member of, contributor to the World War II Museum, author of a couple of books on veterans who were baseball players. And most important, you've done a great job of educating America's youth in your school and in other areas of the importance of respecting the service of veterans and helping them where they can. Great to see you. Do you have a final thought for us today?
Yeah, I was going to mention, you know, I'm sitting here in my classroom, and knowing that, you know, when you say you're a teacher, all of us are teachers. Everyone, I'm looking at this screen, we're all teachers, and it's our duty to pass on these stories, because there's more. Bob Feller talked to me because I just wanted to talk to him about his time in the service. I didn't want to get into the baseball. He's done that all the time and everything. But when I talked to him as a veteran, his face just lit up. My time with him in New Orleans, we did a baseball at work conference in New Orleans. It was fantastic. It was great. And in this classroom, my kids know who Ted Williams are. I have 12-year-olds who know who Ted Williams are. I have 14-year-olds who say, you know, when a kid asks, "Hey, who's Duke Snyder?" Don't ask him, you know, because then I spend the next 4 minutes, you know, just going off. Baseball is a relational game. Classrooms are a relational place, and there's no better way to do it than through the lens of baseball. Baseball is the greatest sport. Nobody can convince me otherwise.
Very good. Todd Anton, thank you so much for joining us, calling in from California. And our team, Bob Arnold from Bob Feller Foundation and Navy League of New York, and Bill Nowlin, a noted and prestigious writer in the Boston area, an expert. Thank you for your stories on Ted Williams and the Red Sox, who were veterans. Great to see you all. And on Saturday, May 6th, the USS Cooperstown will be commissioned at the passenger ship terminal on the west side of Manhattan. The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, will be there, many other Navy officials. And the ceremony is highlighted by the moment where the ship sponsor will say, "Man our ship and bring her to life." A great Navy tradition. It's a lifetime memory when you hear those. I was at the commissioning of USS Michael Murphy about 10 years ago in New York, and it's such an amazing moment. At that point, the sailors and officers of the ship were standing on the pier, run up the gangplanks to the ship, and the whistles start going, the guns start turning, and the ship is officially commissioned as a ship of the United States, of the United States Navy, and it's a great moment. We're looking forward to that. I want to thank our friends from the Navy League, Captain Frank Russo, who is their president, and also Jessica Hitchens, who is their executive director for all their help. We'll look forward to be there on May 6th to bring you some of the photos and video and talks with some of the crew members of the USS Cooperstown. So thank again to our guests, Todd Anton, Bob Arnold, Bill Nowlin. I'm Ken Kraetzer for CaMMVetsMedia. We cover cadets, midshipmen, the military, and veterans proudly since 2008. Have a great day. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Ken.